Our next guest is Adrian Cockcroft, a tech advisor at OrionX.net. Our topic today is platform engineering done right. Now, Adrian, he's a tech advisor and consultant, previously VP at Amazon, spent time at a VC firm, and was a cloud architect at Netflix, and has been telling stories about that for the last decade. Also, if we have time, we're going to be talking about microservices retrospect, what we've learned and didn't learn from Netflix. And also, he has a dual talk track, and the other one is cloud provider sustainability, which that's an interesting topic if we have some time to jump right into it. Please join me in welcoming Adrian Cockcroft to the show. Adrian, thank you so much for joining me.
Cool. Glad to be here again. Good to see you.
So, Adrian, you joined us at reInvent for one of our talk tracks and our podcast happening. Today, you're joining my podcast, and we're talking about a very important topic. Now, you posted this, an article on Medium, talking about platform engineering teams done right. Adrian, I'm going to let you do a little quick introduction about yourself, and I want to jump into this topic.
Yeah, it was one of those things where there has been a lot of discussion of the term recently, and I started seeing other people writing blogs. Sam Newman wrote one, and there's just more chatter about platform engineering. And so I decided that I wanted to just get it out, what I thought about this, and some of the experiences based on largely on the experiences I had at Netflix, but sort of rather than talking specifically about like how to do it in a very specific way about a particular product, I want to talk about the principles you'd use and some of sort of my view of how platform engineering looks and why are people talking about it now anyway, that's the other piece.
In your article, you outline 4 principles. Before we get to that, I got to ask you, what is the definition of platform engineering?
Well, it's something that people have always done, right? If you're going to build something, you build it in layers, you build a base platform, you build on top of that. So it's sort of a stable base that you can build another layer on top of, right? So as you get deeper into the platform, you usually get things that are more stable, more mature, and you're building something new on top. So rather than, hey, I want to build a website, let's write an operating system from scratch. Or let's design our own CPU. We don't do that kind of thing, right? We start with a CPU platform, operating system platform. We don't write our own languages. We pick a language platform. That comes with a whole lot of libraries. Then we start looking at frameworks. And after a while, you figure, okay, that collection of technology stack that you decided to use is your platform. Right? So that's the general idea of what a platform is. The reason it's come up as a topic now, I mean, this is a very old concept, and it's used across many industries, not just an IT thing. I think there's sort of 3 reasons why it's happening now. One is just the general chatter about it that people have been talking about because like Kubernetes is complicated and people have started building products and tools that like deal with that complexity. As there are more and more options on the cloud vendors, it's like, how do you pick out of the 200 different AWS services and whatever there is on Azure and Google and narrow that down to the things you're actually going to use, how you're going to put them together, what guardrails you're putting in, what's your security stance, how are you building authentication, those kinds of things. So that's a need to have an opinionated platform. And then on top of that, there are some vendors who've got tools that they're trying to sell where they're trying to push platform engineering. And so we're starting to see some sort of vendor marketing budget where they're trying to get people to pick up platforms as a new buzzword. So you see things like, is platform replacing DevOps and stuff like that? And no, it's just an old topic, and it's just another way of doing things. But then the final thing that I think makes it interesting right now is the Team Topologies book. Hopefully your viewers have seen that book or at least heard about it. It's got some very useful ideas and on how to structure engineering teams. And they have different types of teams. And one of those teams is a platform team. So they have it explicitly as one of the teams. They just picked that name because it seemed reasonable. But the idea is it's a team that is managing whatever the platform is, and it has an API and consumer. So it's like an internal product team that you use to build something. And I think what's really kicking this off is that book sort of crystallized the definition of what a platform team and platform engineering was. And that's sort of why it's become just recently a hot topic, because this isn't, You can go back 10 years and people were talking about platforms, or 20 years. So it's not new, but it's just got some salience right now.
I was going to ask you, this is not something new because you were talking about architecture, using hardware, infrastructure, and then what you're building on top of that. We're going back to like data center, but you're really talking about the generalization. I think your article talks about if you could show this in a graphical design, you were going to use a layer cake, right? But you decided to use like the map or, kind of depict everything. And I think layers is very, it kind of outlines it, right? Here's what you got to have. Here's the next thing, and this, the platform, correct me if I'm wrong, is it like the application as a whole? Like, here's my app, I'm using it on this platform with this operating system, this service, this tool on top of it?
So the first principle I have is that there isn't one platform and there isn't one platform team. It's layers. And each layer in the platform has different concerns and you'd need different specializations on it. So on your org chart, if you're at any scale at all, you'll have multiple platform teams looking after different pieces of it, and then they're layered together in different ways for different parts of the business. Going back to the sort of the Netflix example, we were on top of AWS. AWS is a platform. It's a very stable platform. They don't take things away. They just add features every now and again. You can take code you wrote 10 years ago, it probably still works on AWS. The scripting and the tooling is just adding features. So it's a very stable, growing platform. So on top of that, though, we said, okay, this is our policies for how we're going to create new accounts. This is how we're going to authenticate to them. This is how our internal sort of LDAP and name services are hooked up to the cloud. Here's how we manage it from a security point of view, all those kinds of things. So we had an opinionated platform, the Netflix cloud platform, that was just how we decided to use AWS. So that was the first layer. And then that was used by different teams across Netflix. And the team most people think of is the team that builds the front-end code. So we built a whole lot of code in Java. There were libraries and all the stuff we needed to build and deploy Java applications into production to build a web page, website, mobile apps, all that stuff. So that was one set of platform. But there was another team building more operation stuff, and they wanted a Python-based platform. So we ended up building a Python version of it, which with some duplication, but basically to build out the things that we wanted to do there. Then there was a data science team that was, again, working very differently. They were mostly running Hadoop and things like that, whatever, Teradata's, whoever knows, whatever they were running at the time. And they had a very different platform because they were concerned with doing data science. You don't need to be concerned with keeping the website up and the front end and downtime. You're mostly concerned with throughput and getting your batch jobs to finish by tomorrow, those kinds of things. And we had another platform around encoding movies because the big workload at Netflix was sort of crunching through all of these incoming video streams and re-encoding them over and over again to make them slightly better, all that kind of work. So they each had their own platform team sitting on top of sort of the central platform. And then within them, you had other platform layers on top of that as well, depending on exactly what you were doing. So that's kind of the layering. And so that's the first principle, is that you should look at it as layers and not try to jam everything into the responsibilities into one team. You'll end up with too many different things happening at once, and you want to separate it out a little bit.
Yeah, but if you're jamming it into one team, you have multiple different platforms or variations of the platform and no uniformity across the teams. Doesn't that make it a little complex to manage throughout an entire organization?
Well, you want to optimize the different layers to whatever you have. You want the best of breed, right? If you've got a data science platform, you're working with, I don't know, Splunk and Databricks and whoever else, right? You've got a whole bunch of different products there that you're using on top of whatever. So you've got different expertise, different vendor relationships. You might have things on different cloud providers. Like your email platform probably isn't on AWS. It's probably on Microsoft or Google, right? That's one of your cloud platforms. So you've got all these different platforms and their different specializations. And yeah, there's some overlap, but the first thing to do is to make sure you're managing those vendor relationships well, and you're developing and building the sort of digested version of that raw vendor experience into what you want to use with your own kind of sort of use cases in mind. So that's the way I think about it. And on top of that, you can build more portability if that's what you need. Like there are some SaaS providers that deploy to every cloud and on-prem because that's what they have to do, right? So they package something up as a bunch of whatever Kubernetes pieces, and then they can deploy it anywhere. So they're working with an abstraction layer that's a little bit higher up because they need to be portable. If you're just trying to get a web service built and run efficiently, you're probably more embedded into your specific cloud provider because that's going to get you going faster and cost less. So there's different trade-offs there.
So Adrian, before we get to actually understanding platform engineering teams done right, you talked about the first principle of the layers, and what's the second principle?
What order did I put them in? So the first one was lots of layers. The second one, I think, I have to look it up.
Was dynamic evolve over time? And
oh,
things
yeah,
tend
that
to
was
move
the thing.
up the stack.
No, yeah, that was the second one. Yeah. So the idea is that you've got some, the platform you're building, and this is, again, what we did sort of from the Netflix point of view. AWS was developing and adding features underneath. So for a while, we ran our own Hadoop clusters. Then this is ages ago, about 2009 or so. And then AWS came out with the MR, which is Hadoop Cluster as a Service. And we said, okay, let's stop doing it ourselves. We'll start using the cloud. Some of the security models and things like that were sort of handcrafted for a while. Key management, we handcrafted a key management system. And then when AWS came out with one, we migrated to that. So you kind of look at the things you had to build because your platform doesn't provide them. And you want to be able to dynamically move up the stack and have as thin a layer as possible and just keep growing that up as you go. If you get too much into a vendor provided layer there, then the vendors tend to want to maximize the value of their layer so that they can charge you more for it. And they want to make a thicker and thicker layer between you and whatever is underneath. So this is why I think it's important to have an internal platform team that is always trying to thin that layer rather than make it fatter.
When you said thin that layer, but you also said that you guys developed and did your own Hadoop cluster or your own key management system, and then AWS did it, and you're utilizing that. What's the difference between like you build your own versus buy or use their services? Because if you use their services, you're thickening that layer, but then you have your own KMS, you're thinning that layer. Help me understand the difference and what's the value of doing one versus the other.
So it's more like there are vendors who say, hey, we'll just take care of everything for you, right? And they are often used in enterprise accounts because enterprise is kind of like that. And enterprises end up paying quite a lot of money and ending up with a lot of legacy stuff, which is relatively inflexible, right? So that's the path you can go down. It's hey, we're going to make this easy and consistent for you. And in the end, that may be the right thing to do, but in the end, it's going to slow you down and cost you more, rather than this idea that you don't want to be beholden to a vendor for the platform layers that are close to your application, right? You want vendors deep in the stack that are going to just be stable, and so cloud providers, maybe data science providers, those kinds of things. You want to build up on that, but these sort of orchestration layers, I think, that's what people are trying to sell you as some higher level orchestration layer, and it looks. There's nice promises in there, but you're going to end up locked into an orchestration layer that's going to end up being something that gets in your way. That's kind of the opinion I have anyway. I mean, it works for some things, but you need to be really careful because this going actually to one of the other principles was that internal platform layers, who is using your platform, right? You can talk to the developers. You can email them. You can say, okay, we're going to deprecate this feature. So everyone needs to get off it. We're going to stop using it. We're going to change stuff. We're going to do a complete rewrite of this piece of the API for some reason, right? We're going to internationalize it because we're launching in countries with foreign languages. So we have to do like deep changes to the thing. That works if you're internal because you know who the customers are. Like you talk to them, they're in the same building as you, the same company as you. You've got leverage over sort of, say, executives say, no, you are going to move, whatever. You can allocate resources to do that. When you've got external vendors, or if you externalize what you're building as an API to the outside world, then you've basically got to build something stable. You can only add things, you can't take things away. If Netflix changes its external API, TV sets stop working, right? And they don't know how many people are running, there's millions of people out there running TV sets and games consoles and set-top boxes. And there had to be a lot of stability in that interface. Whereas the internal platform that was being used by developers to do personalization algorithms could change continuously. So you have to kind of think about that and decide, are you building an externalizable API, which you should expect to have really good stability in documentation and evolve relatively slowly. And that means that if you're depending on something that you want to change quickly, then an external vendor is usually not going to be able to develop the new thing fast enough for you. Right? So you've got to build your own version of it, and then maybe the vendor comes in later and you replace it. And that would be probably an API change at that point as well.
Okay. So you were mentioning the fourth principle, a clear distinction made between building for internal platforms and optimizing change quickly. Before I ask you about the third principle, which is the interface to the platform should be driven by users of the platform. Everybody, I want to let you know that we're talking with Adrian Cockcroft, a tech advisor at OrionX.net, around platform engineering teams done right. I will post a link in the description below to his Medium article that really defines how it can be done right and his interpretation of it and bringing some of the information to you. Adrian, the third principle that you have on it, I know we skipped around a little bit, but how do you really understand the users of your platform?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was really kind of the difference between a platform team and a regular development team, is that you're doing internal product management. You need the interface to the platform needs to be defined by who's using it. And if you've got a very specific internal requirement, you should be building APIs that absolutely meet that need. So you end up doing product management, and you either have and some people advocate hiring specific product managers for platform teams. And if you're a smaller team or you have somebody, it's usually the manager of the team is quite often, you need to have some project management skilling, some product management skills to be a good platform team manager, because what you're building is you've got to have a roadmap. You've got to prioritize. You've got to have a backlog of requests of the team saying, okay, we all want to do all these things. What's the order that we're going to do them in? There's never enough resources to build everything instantly. So you've got to say, okay, this is going to be quick and this is going to take a while, and work with the people that want the platform to change to help them sort of build the right things as it evolves. So it's classic product management stuff, except you have internal customers rather than external ones.
Adrian, how does a company take this platform team? Because here's what I'm seeing is that, and we're talking about, we have like DevOps, DevSecOps, ops, however you want to do this. Is this like Plat Ops? There's another term that's out there. How does a company handle an additional team or integrate it with other teams already out there? Is it an extension part of it?
I think most companies already have some kind of platform team. What we're really talking about here is sort of codifying the way you think about it. They're just a natural piece of when you break down what you're doing, you will tend to have platform teams. What I'm trying to provide is guidance for when you're thinking about how the org chart should be laid out. If you're, the CTO or CIO or something, looking at the system, looking at how you lay out your teams. I was trying to get people to think about it, have some principles for thinking about how they should apply what they're doing, platforms engineering to what they're doing. So that was sort of the idea. So, but you may already have a whole bunch of teams and they aren't working well because you've jammed too many different things into one team, or you're trying to make one platform that does everything. And sort of by breaking it up a little bit in the right way, it may actually be that your platform just works well and your teams work well and your developers get unblocked and you can move faster. Because generally everybody wants to save money, reduce waste, and go faster, right? Those are the sort of core reasons why we have these platforms.
Speaking of go faster, reduce waste, if we have some time, we're going to be talking about the microservices retrospect that Adrian actually has 2 talks on the same day coming up on March 29th. It's really around what we've learned and didn't learn from Netflix, and also cloud provider sustainability, the current status and future directions. Now, Adrian, we're talking about the platform teams done right. Is it already that they have it in place? And I'm thinking of traditional IT environments, enterprises that have been out there where they have the silo effect, right? I have my networking, my infrastructure, my AD. Here's my regular server admin group who deals with not only, I want to say the platform like AWS or hardware within a data center, and then manages that. And then we have my business applications. I have all these different silos out there. Are we really taking a member from each or putting them all together and calling them a platform team? Or is it really just kind of like everybody coming together and doing the work, not individually, but as a group?
I think some of those teams are naturally platform teams, like a data center ops team is a platform, right? You're providing the buildings and the networking and the various bits and pieces you need to, or the things you get from a cloud provider if you're in the cloud. So that's a platform team. And we've seen people running internal IT building things that look something more like a public cloud, right? And then they're also getting into the support and sustainability, manageability of that. So, but if you're talking about the sort of siloed environment where you have like sysadmins and network admins and storage admins and whatever, security people, and they're all in different teams and they're not really working well together, those you've basically carved up by specialization rather than platform teams, and those aren't platform teams. If you look at team topologies, they actually have a category for, I forget exactly what it's called, but it's sort of deep technical specialists who support other things, like security is one of those, right? They touch everything, so everything has to be secure. You need deep specialists, security people sort of clump together. They have a mindset. You want to hire them into a team. Performance teams sometimes are like that too. They need to support across the organization. But again, performance specialists are a particular breed of people. So you get these different areas where there is some specialization, but those aren't platform teams. If you're trying to build an API that makes everybody productive, that's a different skill set. And so there's product mindset where you're figuring out what product you need to build to make the internal product you need to build and what external components you're going to gather together to build that. And that's kind of the integration is where the platform team comes together. And if you're in a regular IT environment, you might say VMware is sort of a platform like that. It sort of gathers, you just go to VMware, you're buying it off the shelf, right? And then your platform is going to, it's a super functional platform. It does all these cool things. Its pace of innovation is whatever VMware decide to do. You go to VMworld every year and find out what they're announcing, right? So it's got its own sort of pace at which it goes at. And if you run purely on top of that, you're running at that pace. And that might be good for your business, whatever you're trying to do. But if you're trying to move faster than that, you need to build something that sits above cloud, whatever or infrastructure platform you have, and build teams that work together. And that was really what DevOps was about, taking these development teams and the ops teams and building interfaces so they could work well together, or building them to be the same teams. So organizing it to be one team that has some development and some operation skills in it and can just move faster because they're not having to file tickets to each other and have meetings to get stuff done. So that's sort of where DevOps came from. And I think, I don't think there's any conflict here between DevOps and platforms and all the other different areas. But those very siloed organizations are very slow moving and relatively dysfunctional. And that's one of the problems some people are fighting with.
I agree with you with the silo effect is dead. It's just that it's very hard to get things done because they pass from one group to the next. And then it's like a ticket that sits there for 2 weeks, next. And that's why, cloud has been really efficient, is that I'm able to get all this stuff that I need right away. Adrian, how do I as a company know if I have an existing platform team or I need a platform team?
I drew it out using that Wortley map, right? So I basically drew a stack saying these are the different layers. If you sort of look at that map or try to draw out your own version of it, you say, okay, how evolved are the different layers have I got? Do I even have that layer? Or is it mixed into a whole bunch of other things? Like if you don't have a platform team, you've probably got different application teams rebuilding similar stuff, right? So they're all managing their own databases, but differently, right? You've got 15 different ways to stand up a MySQL server or whatever, right? So you haven't done a platform that says there's one way to do this, and it automatically gets backups, and it automatically gets security, and it's automatically got whatever availability you need. So it's sort of the guardrails that you need as a business. Those are the things you want to platformize. And if you see some companies, I know some companies grew very organically where every individual team set up their own cloud accounts and just randomly built things that were different. And it's a huge mess. And I've talked to some CIOs about trying to clear up after those messes, right? There were some very large AWS users who had just no idea what was going on across the organization. They just sort of organically grown everywhere. And then there's this whole process of trying to, okay, let's turn that into something that's more of a set of platforms that make sense and they can aggregate for all the right reasons, get bigger discounts and all of those kinds of things.
Is the platform team helping me understand some of like maybe the shareable resources or uniformity within my other services or other platforms that are being out there? And do they have visibility or should they have visibility into all the platforms? And this seems like a good time to jump in and talk about today's sponsor, Veeam. How would you like to own, control, and protect your data in any cloud, anywhere, including AWS? Veeam Backup for AWS is a native solution to protect all of your AWS data. It's fully automated, set it, forget it within one platform, centrally managed. Veeam Backup for AWS is a robust solution from snapshots, replication, full recovery within AWS, granular file recovery, and including recover outside of AWS. Implement Veeam Backup for AWS today before you find out that your current solution isn't working. Now, how about we get you back to that podcast?
What you've got is a developer, let's say you have a product manager, customer-facing product manager that says, we need to develop a new feature because customers are, something that customers want, right? They should be working with an engineering team to say, okay, how quickly can we develop this and test it and see if this makes customers better, right? The classic sort of model, a better personalization algorithm so that the things we show to the customers is more relevant to them, that kind of stuff, right? How quickly can you develop that depends on how mature the platform is, right? If the developers have to do too much, undifferentiated heavy lifting, as Werner Vogels likes to say, then they're wasting time. So you look at the things that are going on over and over again, and you say, okay, we'll do that once. We'll have somebody build it into a platform, and we want it to be an API call or a library that you include in your application, and you're just done. Like, going back to the sort of Netflix examples, Netflix DVD site was an English-only site. And when we moved to the cloud and we moved to streaming, we internationalized it. So we had to build out a whole set of internationalization libraries, and the platform team went and looked at all the different ways we could do that, picked a supplier, figured out how to do all of these different things, and just built a whole process for how do you do a fully internationalized site and bake that into the platform. And then all the developers had exactly the same way, all the different teams building front ends for different devices or the website or whatever, they all had one way to do internationalization, right? So that's the kind of thing where you're standardizing it to be efficient and in the long term.
So that's where I was getting at with the standardization on how to accomplish maybe a new integration, a new setup. like international, right? They standardize a way that this could be done, not for just English or one language, but for all languages. How does that make it helpful in maybe just managing or monitoring or kind of troubleshooting the environment when things are uniform across?
Yeah, the other thing you can do with a platform is bake in observability, to use another trendy buzzword. But basically, yeah, you just like the standard way of doing things, however you go build a new service. If you're building it on top of a platform, the platform has the instrumentation. It automatically logs what it's doing. You just deploy a thing and then you go to the dashboard, wherever the dashboards are, and your thing will just appear there with all the normal metrics and uptime and a health check and all that kind of stuff. So that was definitely part of what I'd expect to see in a platform, right? I mean, you could obviously do it a million different ways, and many companies have, I mean, pretty much every company will have lots of different ways to do logging, lots of different monitoring tools. Whatever you build into your platform is going to end up being the dominant way that you get things done. But you may have different things, like if you've got some of your systems built in Java and some in Rust and some in Go, you may well have different monitoring tooling and things for that, which will sort of need to come together in some way. And one of the problems with platforms is that as you get more diversity within the platform, it gets increasingly more expensive to keep them all in sync. Like keeping your Java platform, your Python platform, and your Go platform tooling all completely in sync is actually more work than most people think.
Is this more just an extension of like orchestration? Because for me, I'm thinking that I'm deploying out this application here. It orchestrates on this standardized infrastructure for the environment. It gets all these observability, right? So I'll use the buzzword monitoring capabilities. Here's the backup to DR, the flow. Here's the database that you get. Is that just part of the platform team to orchestrate these processes?
So the platform team should build into the platform the interfaces that collect the data and deliver it to whatever the monitoring tool is. There's probably another team running whatever the observability stuff is, right?
Yep.
Or sending it off to, favorite vendor, Datadog, New Relic, or whatever, right? So, but you build in the hooks, the collecting agents, the security platform. Similar, you probably got some local scanning, file scanning and things like that, intrusion detection systems that you're building in. Those should be built into the platform. So there's other teams saying, like the security team says, this is the security tooling we've got, and these are the bits of it we want to put into the platform. And every now and again, they'll say, okay, we've come up with a new thing, or we need to update it or something. So the platform team is taking in requests from other teams to bake in certain opinionated ways to configure all these other vendor and open source and whatever tooling. And that's sort of the idea of it, I think.
So everybody, we're talking with Adrian Cockcroft around platform teams done right. And we're going to get to our next topic in a couple of minutes. But Adrian, my last question for you is, okay, so I feel that I have a platform team or I need a platform team. Is there a process, documentation? How do I implement this and make sure that I do it right? And I'm sure there's not one size that fits all, but what guidance is out there to help me actually implement a team?
I think the Team Topologies, the book, it would be a good place to start, and to try and understand how you're laying out your teams in general. And then once you get to, once you've sort of said, okay, these pieces of my entire tech stack look like platforms, I would probably sort of work vendor upwards, right? Because you need somebody who's an expert in AWS or VMware or whatever, Splunk or something, right? Those are specialist skills. So you need to kind of build pieces of your platform and just start building layers. So, but starting with the external stable platforms you've decided to pick, and then start building layers on top of those. And then as you get closer and closer to the business logic, you want to build something that's extremely specific to that business logic to make it super efficient. It's like a set of libraries that are in the right language that just automatically do all of the usual stuff that the sort of don't repeat yourself kind of principle, like all the stuff that everyone has to do every time. So there's a number of sort of toolings ways to sort of tool that all the way up. But in the end, if somebody wants to build a new feature, if you do it right, you should be able to just build some new business logic, in a few hours, right? It shouldn't be week-long development process, even for fairly complicated new things. There are certainly companies out there, and there's a book called The Value Flywheel Effect by David Anderson. Lots of stories
That's a good
in
book.
that. It's a great book. It's just came out recently. I wrote one of the forwards for it. Simon Wardley wrote the other one. There's more stuff in about Wardley mapping we haven't really got into. But they really talk about, taking a team that had never used the stuff the platform they built internally, and like training them how to do it for an afternoon. And the next day they built a completely new application, deployed it from scratch, and it was up and running in production like the following day. And that kind of pace of development is unbelievable to most people. Right. And so it's possible to build super productive platforms, and that book's got some great ideas in it.
Yeah, that's not the traditional model. Or if you talked about 5 years ago to 10 years ago, it took months, even years to get an application spun up. If you're able to do this in less than a day, then you're really super efficient, and the speed to time for it. Adrian, is there a time that it usually takes to implement a successful team, or what does success look like during that time?
Generally, most companies are on sort of an annual planning cycle for budgets and things like that. And right now, most people are like in hiring freezes and things like that rather than growing. But it's more about like when you're laying out, okay, where are we placing the headcount, the budgets? That's when you're doing the low reorg to say, okay, this is what's important. And if you can figure out ways that you can be more efficient using the platform, sometimes when times are hard, that's a good time to rethink the way you're organizing. So it's probably good now to say, okay, what can we do that's just going to make our work more efficient, get more done with fewer people, less unproductive work, less wasted work. And one of the ways you do that is by reducing the time to ship, time to value, getting it super fast, so you don't have work sitting out there that's been started and hasn't been finished. That sort of work in progress, that's where most of the waste is in companies. You want to get a super quick turnaround. So all this is around speeding up the pace at which you get things done, and that will end up saving you money.
Nice. All right, so Adrian, I'm going to switch gears. I want to talk about two of your talks that are coming up on March 29th. Let's talk about microservices retrospect. And I really like the title of what we learned and didn't learn from Netflix. Do you want to share a little bit of insights on that?
Yeah, this is two talks. They're at QCon London. So it's an in-person conference. There will be videos that they'll put out later. And I have to record the video this coming weekend. So I'm sort of in the middle of trying to write the slides right now. So the keynote I'm giving that morning is this retrospective, looking back at what we learned from Netflix. And the first talk I gave about Netflix at QCon London was in 2012. I did one in 2011 in QCon San Francisco. And those were really some of the first times I went out and said, this is what we're doing, and got mostly baffled, surprised. People weren't digesting it at all. And then by about 2013, 2014, people were really getting into it. We saw the Docker sort of come out in 2014, really, and really pick up in containerization and a whole bunch of things that sort of led us to where we are today. So I'm going to look back at that flow, what happened, dig out some of the old slide decks, and see what we ended up contributing to the discussion from the sort of early discussions of Netflix and what got lost along the way. So this platform story is actually a piece of it. There's a whole story about versioning, where I have some very specific ideas about that. I need to write another blog post about versioning, but there'll be something about that. And then I've done a few talks recently, which I did fairly humorously, but I called it Adrian's Greatest Hits. You might be able to find a video of me doing that. We did one for the AWS Community Day, where I go on stage. I'm not going to do this in London, I don't think, but I went on stage wearing like 6 layers of t-shirts, and I kept like digging out some slides from a talk I did in 2010 with my Netflix shirt on, and then I pulled off a layer and I did a DockerCon talk.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Layer. I was just hamming it up and having some fun with it, like it was like a classic rock band had gone on tour, and
That
you only
goes with
wanted
your
to hear the
layers
hits.
for platform teams.
Yeah, sort of. But no, the idea was really that it was, you didn't want to, if you see a classic rock band, you don't want to hear the obscure album tracks. You want to hear the hits, and there's sort of one or two hits on each album. So it was a 5-minute piece out of all these 40-minute presentations. It's a bit jumbled, but I had fun with it. And so this is going to be a sort of more refined version of that, looking back at, so what did we say then? What did we learn from it? What do we still haven't learned? Like, I keep telling people to do things that it seemed obvious 10 years ago. Why aren't you doing it? Right. And so hopefully we can sort of move the idea on and bring in some of the gaps. So some people say microservices doesn't work for them. It says, no, look at what they're doing. It says, well, of course it doesn't work. You've missed out these 3 important things that made it work. Right.
Yep.
And so there's a sort of holistic view that all the different things we did supported each other into a system that worked. And if you try to cherry pick and just take 2 or 3 pieces out of a complete system, quite often it fails because you say, oh, this looks too complicated, I can do a simple version. But a simple version doesn't actually work because it doesn't deal with all the real world complexities that are going to creep up on you. So some of this is a bit about sort of pushing back at these people saying microservices don't work and we should do something else. It's like, well, you're doing it wrong. Get off my lawn and whatever. I can be the grumpy old guy. Right.
Nice. So that's the talk that you're doing in the morning at QCon. And in the afternoon, I believe you're doing one for cloud provider sustainability, the current status and future directions. And a few minutes ago, you were talking about everybody's in their hiring freeze and the things that are going on in sustainability. You also had a LinkedIn post on talking about sustainability and some of the things that AWS were doing or couldn't do. Do you want to touch on this topic in general and what you're going to be talking about and maybe your LinkedIn post?
Yeah, so QCon has started doing a sustainability track. And the way QCon is structured, they have a keynote in the morning, then they break into multiple tracks. And the track is a curated theme of something like 4 speakers, a panel, and an open space. And they run that for the rest of the day. So in QCon San Francisco last October, I actually led and curated the sustainability track. It was the first time they'd done it. And they're doing it again in London. I'm not curating. I mean, it's being run by some local people from London. But I'm ending up as a speaker in that track. And I'm doing and the talk I'm giving is at the end of the sequence of talks. And I'm talking about, okay, this is what the cloud providers currently have. This is what the gaps are. And, we could complain about what isn't there. But what I really want to do is say, well, let's look a few years into the future. If we had good APIs to sustainability information, what could you do? What kinds of problems do people need to solve? What sort of tooling is going to be there? And just try to do a bit of crystal ball gazing about, like, eventually, once everybody's got all the data and it's more usable form, there'll be some interesting things. And what will the world look like in, say, 2025 or something like that? And that's kind of a slightly different talk. But like I said, it's at the end of this sustainability focused track where there's a whole load of different talks about different aspects of how to develop more effectively. I call this DevSusOps because DevSecOps had all the fun. So I'm going to Dev Sustainability and Operations. And I've been talking about this a few times. So basically, I just think carbon is going to be a metric. The energy usage of a system or the carbon it's emitting is just another metric that all the tools vendors are eventually going to have. And the question is, what are you going to do with that metric?
I think that's the biggest thing is you have this data. So AWS released a carbon footprint calculator last year. What was it? April sustainability pillar came out around that as well. And you have these metrics, but what are you doing with these metrics? What actions are you taking off these metrics? Adrian, these things were released and some of these were worked on when you were at your time at AWS. What is the value or what are customers going to be using or how are they going to be using this data?
Yeah, you mentioned this LinkedIn post that I did. So I did a blog post about reInvent and the sustainability talks at reInvent. And in that, I talked about how I was disappointed that they didn't release any updates to the carbon footprint tool, which came out in March last year. And they haven't done any updates since March last year. So that's a year ago now. I was expecting to see something at reInvent. So I sort of asked around a bit, like, why haven't you done anything? They said, yeah, we're still working on it, but, there's a hiring freeze, and we only had like a small number of people anyway, and there's a bunch of other things that are more important that we're trying to do. So I just said, well, yeah, they're still working on it. It's still important. It's just that in the current environment at AWS, they have a hiring freeze, and lots of things are going slower. So it's just one of the ones that got caught in that. So I did that, and then Caroline Donnelly, I think it is, from Computer Weekly wrote a story about it and called AWS, and they said, yeah, we're doing fine and we're all being sustainable. And then so I wrote a response to that over the weekend, and probably made somebody
The
at
typical
AWS
PR response.
Yeah, it was the typical PR response. And I was helped write those responses when I was at, like, I know what the standard answers are because the sustainability standard answers list document was one I was editing when I was there. So it didn't answer the question, which is like, why come and I understand why they're running slowly, but right now they really don't have an API and they've got very basic information. Azure has a comprehensive API in preview, lots of information. Google, again, API, lots of information. And AWS needs to do catch up. And right now you can't build a tool that goes across the three cloud providers because AWS has none of the data. And the data on Google and Azure is a little different on each of them. So it's not unified yet, but it's at least there's a first pass at an API and a data model there. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. And I was just sort of grumbling at AWS, but also trying to sort of state why I think they haven't done this yet. So, but probably made some poor AWS PR persons unhappy over the weekend because they had to kind of pay attention to something instead of having the weekend off. But, that's just the way it goes. And that's I'm sort of summarizing that into this talk I'm doing the end of, in 1 month from now, basically.
Nice. So everybody, I want to let you know, March 29th, Adrian has 2 talks happening. We've already talked about the first one, microservices retrospect, and then the second one, we just round up the conversation on cloud provider sustainability, the current status and future directions. Now, Adrian's been doing a lot of talks on sustainability, actually had a hand in helping and some of the stuff at his previous company, and he has deep insights on it. So I think this is going to be one of those cool talks that Adrian's going to provide a great value. Adrian, before we wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I'm doing a few other talks at different events. I'm going to be at Monitorama in June in Portland, Oregon. Much more geeky talk if people are into monitoring tools and techniques. And I'm doing a Chaos Carnival talk on March 15th. It's an online talk about chaos engineering, another topic that I get into occasionally. So, I'm sort of semi-retired, doing advisory work, doing a bit of consulting every now and again, and I seem to have ended up with needing to spend the next few weeks writing slide decks. But anyway, that's kind of life for me at the moment. At least I can kind of do what I feel like because I don't have a corporate company telling me what I can and can't do and say. So that's been my...
You don't have a PR behind you telling you
I don't have a PR department, and so other than what I decide to do. So that's basically it. The other thing recently is I've switched from Twitter to Mastodon, and I have a few accounts there. I'm pretty easy to find there. I'm on the main Mastodon, the social account, and then Medium just started off. So I just started tinkering around with I think it's me.dm, I think is their Mastodon server. So basically mothballed my Twitter account. It's still sitting there, but there's no tweets on it. So that's kind of the fun thing then. It's like, watching Twitter gradually sort of get messed up, and like probably some certs are going to time out and it's going to crash sometime randomly when it's inconvenient. That's the sort of stuff
it's
that
still
happens.
Holding strong. I think every conversation I have with a technical person and we say our Twitter handle is like, yes, it's still around. And we've been saying it's still around for the last couple of months. We'll see how it's going. I will share your Mastodon handle in the description below. Adrian, will you also share with me the links to some of your talks that are coming up, whether they're recorded live, so I can share them out with everybody?
Yeah, I give you some links, and then I'm Adrian CO, so you don't have to spell Cockcroft. just Adrian CO on GitHub, as well as, and I put Adrian CO/slides on GitHub. I actually have a whole bunch of slide decks there, so it makes it a bit easier to find stuff.
Nice. Adrian, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, great to see you again. And thanks for putting all this together.
Yeah, not a problem. So everybody, Adrian Cockcroft, tech advisor at orionx.net. Today we were talking about platform engineering, teams done right. Adrian, enjoy the rest of your day, and I really appreciate you joining me for this podcast.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, my name's Jon Myer. Thank you for watching the Jon Myer Podcast. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify, because guess what? We're out of here.